aside to Ant-Man and the Wasp as a whole was a largely forgettable film, and its villains were a major contribution as a plot. Captain Marvel presents a villain that was physically incapable of hurting his hero, so try to make heads or tails of that. Endgame was spoon-fed everything it needed to be one of the greatest films imaginable, having one of the best villains in the franchise, but in a bizarre maneuver, it threw all of his greatness in the trash in favor of being significantly less compelling and enjoyable. Far From Home was a cringe-heavy film whose villain was okay at best, but one who couldn't quite carry the movie as effectively as Ultra did in the previous outing. Then from there, we have the horrific mess that turned out to be Phase 4. To say the villains in most of these projects were bad is an understatement, and so far, Kang's attempt to recreate the hype that Thanos left behind has been about as successful as the Shockmaster's debut. So what should they have done differently? For starters, let's examine what makes a good villain. Thematically speaking, a good villain will stand for the opposite values that the hero stands for. Scar uses deception against his family to gain power and rules with fear, while Simba challenges him in order to rule with loyalty and respect. Killmonger similarly parallels Black Panther as the evil copy, but he comes up short because his worst deeds either don't happen, get undone, or don't affect the heroes at all. Instead of leaving the legacy of being a great villain, his legacy is merely a debate as to whether his actions are justified or not, and they aren't, just to be clear. A villain may parallel the hero by walking a similar path, but never growing or learning from their mistakes. Chick Hicks shows us everything that Lightning McQueen would have been had he never matured during his time in Radiator Springs. Yellow Jacket attempts to parallel Ant-Man, but instead of representing what Scott could be if he were on the wrong path, he just takes what makes Ant-Man special and removes it by having the same power, and just giving us a shallow final battle. Then as MODOK, he does nothing to affect the heroes in any way, being even more useless than Jar Jar Binks. The villain could represent a goal that the hero aspires to reach. Rattlesnake Jake was the true legend that Rango was pretending to be, and as such, Jake exposed Rango for his phony act. However, Rango defeated this villain by earning his respect, and proving himself to be a legend in his own right. Now don't let the irony get lost on you, and that all these examples I am using are being pulled from children's movies. This villain problem isn't an issue of Disney watering everything down to be family friendly. Not that Marvel has always been all that family friendly to begin with, but had that been the case, it still wouldn't be a valid excuse. In fact, many of cinema's greatest villains come from classic Disney cartoons. But even if you strip all that fancy thematic stuff away and make your villain as simple as possible, the potential is still there to make them great. You don't need gore, bad language, depravity, great power, or even great depth in order to make a good villain. All you truly need is for them to make the hero's journey as difficult as it could possibly be. Any other substance you add on top of that is a bonus. A great villain could be as simple as a big shark or even just a tornado. It's really not all that complex when you put it in simple terms. So with that in mind, it becomes all the more aggravating when Marvel botches it again and again. Example, the T-1000 is an emotionless, unrelatable void of a character whose only goal is to kill the protagonist. He barely emotes, he barely speaks, and he doesn't do anything outside of his pursuit to kill. Yet in spite of his simplicity, he is still an iconic and celebrated villain due to how creatively and effectively he pursues his goal.